The heavy oak doors of the Gilded Steer swung open, not for a senator or a celebrity this time, but for a ghost in a tattered white shirt. Junho stood in the entryway, the blast of conditioned air hitting his face like a physical barrier, carrying the sense of truffle oil, aged leather, and old money. He didn't look like he belonged here. He looked like he belonged in the alley behind the kitchen, fighting stray cats for scraps. His white shirt was stained yellow at the collar and torn at the shoulder, revealing a patch of skin that hadn't seen the sun in weeks. His pants were oversized, cinched with a piece of fraying rope, and his boots left faint, dusty prints on the polished marble floor. But beneath the grime, his posture was rigid, his eyes scanning the room not with the desperate hunger of the starving, but with the cold calculation of an auditor. He took a step forward, and the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of silver against china, the soft jazz, it all seemed to stutter. Heads turned. A woman in pearls gasped audibly, clutching her napkin as if his poverty might be contagious. Junho ignored them. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here because reports had reached his desk, reports that didn't match the profit margins, whispers of a toxicity that was rotting the foundation of his favorite asset from the inside out. To the world, he was the unseen owner of a massive hospitality conglomerate, a man whose signature moved millions. Tonight, he was just a vagrant with a pocket full of crumpled bills and a test that everyone in this room was currently failing. He watched the host stand, frozen behind the mahogany podium. The young man's face went through a rapid cycle of confusion, disgust, and panic. This was the first line of defense, the gatekeeper of the sanctuary. Junho waited, letting the silence stretch, letting the discomfort marinate. He wanted to see if humanity existed here, or if the culture of elitism had completely metastasized. He adjusted his dirty cuffs, feeling the rough fabric scratch his wrist. The sensory details were sharp, the way the crystal chandelier refracts light, the disdain in the eyes of a man cutting a porterhouse steak 3 tables away. It was a theater of cruelty, and the curtain had just risen. He took another step, deliberately heavy, his boot thudding against the floor. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not until he found the rot he could smell beneath the expensive cologne and sizzling fat. The manager descended on the scene like a vulture spotting a dying animal. Preston was a man who wore his authority like a weapon, his suit tailored too tight, his hair gelled into a helmet of sleek arrogance. He didn't walk, he marched, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat to his meticulously curated ambience. Junho saw the sneer form on Preston's lips before the man even spoke. It was a look Junho had seen 1,000 times in his youth, before the money, before the power. It was the look that said you are dirt. Preston stopped 3 feet away, maintaining a hygienic distance, his nose wrinkling slightly. He didn't ask if Junho needed help. He didn't ask if there was an emergency. He simply pointed a manicured finger toward the door, his voice a low, venomous hiss designed to cut without disturbing the VIPs. "Get out," Preston said, the words sharp and final. "We don't serve your kind here. The soup kitchen is 5 blocks east. Leave before I call security and have you dragged out." Junho didn't flinch. He let his gaze drift past Preston, scanning the floor staff. They were frozen, watching the confrontation with a mix of fear and relief that it wasn't them being targeted. Then he saw her. A waitress in a white dress and a red vest stood near the kitchen doors, holding a tray of water glasses. She wasn't looking at him with disgust. She was looking at him with recognition, not of his identity, but of his situation. Her eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, silent warning. She was African American, her hair pulled back in a tight, professional bun, but a loose strand fell across her forehead, betraying her exhaustion. Her name tag read, Maya. While Preston postured and threatened, Maya's grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles turned white. She knew something Preston didn't, or perhaps she just knew the cruelty of this place better than anyone. "I have money," Junho said, his voice raspy, an affectation he adopted for the role. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, chaotic wad of cash, hundreds mixed with ones, dirty and crumpled. He held it up, not arrogantly, but with the simple insistence of a paying customer. "I want a steak." The table in the corner is open. Preston stared at the money, and for a split second, greed wrestled with his snobbery. The cash was real, but the optics were terrible. He looked around the room, gauging the reaction of his wealthy patrons. They were watching, amused now, treating the interaction like a dinner theater performance. Preston's smile returned, but it was cold, predatory. He realized he could humiliate this man and take his money, a double victory for a man of his character. He signaled to the host with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Fine," Preston sneered, dropping his voice to a whisper that only Junho could hear. "If you want to waste your stolen money, be my guest. But if you disturb a single soul, I'll have you thrown into the gutter personally. Put him in the back, near the kitchen draft. And don't give him a menu. He can't read it anyway." Preston turned on his heel, confident in his dominance. He didn't see the slight tightening of Junho's jaw. He didn't see the way Junho's eyes tracked him, marking him, filing away the insult not as a personal grievance, but as evidence. The test had begun, and Preston had already walked into the trap. As Junho was led through the maze of tables, he felt the heavy gaze of the room on his back. He was the intruder, the stain on their perfect evening. But as he sat in the wobbly chair near the swinging kitchen doors, he knew he was the only one in the room who held the power to burn it all down. The table they gave him was an insult in itself. It was wedged between a decorative pillar and the service station, right where the servers dumped dirty dishes and scraped leftovers. The smell of dish soap and discarded fat was pungent here, overpowering the aroma of the wood-fired grill. Every time the kitchen door swung open, a blast of hot steam and shouting voices hit Junho in the back of the neck. It was the penalty box, the place where they put people they wanted to leave. Junho sat slowly, testing the chair's stability. It wobbled. Of course it did. He placed his hands on the tablecloth, noticing a faint coffee stain that hadn't been bleached out. This was how they treated the undesirables. Preston stood near the bar, arms crossed, watching Junho with a hawk-like intensity. He was whispering to the bartender, both of them laughing as they glanced in Junho's direction. They were waiting for him to make a mistake, to spill water, to cough too loudly, to use the wrong fork. They wanted a show. Junho kept his head down, playing the part, but his ears were tuned to the frequency of the room. He heard the waiters complaining about stolen tips. He heard a sous chef yelling about expired meat being pushed for the special. The gloss of luxury was peeling away with every second he sat there. Then Maya approached. She didn't march like Preston. She moved with a quiet, efficient grace, dodging the frantic busboys. She stopped at his table, placing a glass of water down gently. She didn't slam it. She didn't spill it. She set it down with care, placing a coaster underneath it. It was a small act of dignity in a room devoid of it. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice low and steady, though Junho could detect a tremor of nerves. She didn't use the condescending sweetie or han that people often used on the homeless. She called him sir. "My name is Maya. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Junho looked up, meeting her eyes. They were dark and intelligent, framed by fatigue. She was afraid, he realized. She was glancing toward the bar, where Preston was watching. Serving him was a risk. Treating him with respect was a liability. "I want the ribeye," Junho said, pointing at nothing, since they hadn't given him a menu. "The big one. And potatoes." "The tomahawk?" Maya asked, her eyes widening slightly. "Sir, it's a very large portion. And the price is," she hesitated, trying to save him from embarrassment without shaming him. "It's $150. "I have money," Junho repeated, tapping the pocket of his dirty vest. "I know," Maya said quickly, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a hush. "It's not that. It's just the manager, Preston. He's looking for a reason to kick you out. If you can't pay the full bill with tax and tip, he'll call the police. He's done it before." This was the first crack in the facade. A direct confirmation of policy. Junho looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just doing her job, she was protecting him. In a system designed to crush the weak, she was acting as a shield. "I can pay," Junho said, softening his tone just enough for her to hear. "Bring the steak. Medium rare. Please." Maya searched his face for a moment, looking for the madness or the confusion she expected to find. Instead, she found a calm that seemed to unsettle her. She nodded once, a sharp, professional dip of her chin. "I'll put the order in right away."
"Just keep your head down, okay?"
"Please." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, and Junho watched her go. He saw Preston intercept her near the terminal. The manager grabbed her arm. Not enough to leave a bruise, but enough to assert control. He leaned into her ear, whispering something that made Maya flinch. She pulled her arm away and tapped the screen rapidly, her shoulders hunched. Junho's hand curled into a fist beneath the table. The list of offenses was growing. The reckoning was coming, but he needed the meal. He needed the transaction to be complete. He needed to see how far they would go. 20 minutes passed. The restaurant filled up. A couple sat at the table next to Junho, looked at him, and immediately requested to be moved. Preston obliged them with a theatrical apology, casting a dark look at Junho as he escorted the couple to a booth by the window. Junho sat alone in his island of isolation, sipping his tap water. He observed the mechanics of the floor. He saw the way the other servers avoided Maya, as if her proximity to the bum made her radioactive. He saw the busboy, a young kid named Marcus, look at him with pity before being snapped at by Preston to clear table 4. The environment was a pressure cooker. Everyone was terrified of Preston. It wasn't just a bad boss, it was a tyranny. Junho had built his company on principles of respect and excellence. To see it twisted into this hierarchy of fear made his blood run cold. He had seen enough to fire Preston 10 times over. But he needed to understand the depth of it. He needed to know if Maya was an outlier or if there were others. Finally, the kitchen door swung open and Maya emerged with a large oval platter. The tomahawk steak sizzled, the bone curving up like a prehistoric weapon. The smell was intoxicating. Rosemary, garlic, charred beef. It was a masterpiece of culinary execution, starkly out of place in front of a man wearing a shirt held together by grime. Maya navigated the room, balancing the heavy plate. As she approached, Preston stepped into her path again. He blocked her way, forcing her to stop abruptly. The steak wobbled. "Careful," Preston said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Don't drop it. That steak costs more than your rent." A few diners chuckled. Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She stepped around him, her movements stiff. She brought the steak to Junho's table and set it down. It was perfect. A king's meal for a pauper. But Maya didn't step back immediately. She hovered, her body blocking Preston's line of sight for a fraction of a second. "Is there anything else, sir?" she asked loudly, for the benefit of the room. Then her hand moved. It was a sleight of hand that would have impressed a magician. As she placed the steak knife down, her fingers brushed against his rough palm. A small, folded piece of paper, no larger than a fortune cookie strip, was pressed into his hand. It was done so quickly, so smoothly, that if Junho hadn't been trained to notice details, he would have missed it. She pulled back, her face a mask of neutral service. "Enjoy your meal." She walked away quickly, heading straight for the water station as if she needed to busy her hands.
Junho sat frozen.
The steak sizzled in front of him, the steam rising in lazy curls. He didn't pick up his fork. He kept his hand closed around the paper. His heart rate spiked. This wasn't part of the test. This was something else. A variable he hadn't accounted for. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the paper in his lap, shielding it from the cameras and Preston's prying eyes. The paper was a receipt slip, the back scrawled with shaky blue ink. The message was short, rushed, and terrifying in its implications.
"Don't eat the meat.
They messed with it. He wants you sick so you leave."
I'm sorry."
Junho stared at the note. Then he looked at the steak. It glistened with butter and herbs, looking for all the world like the finest meal in the city. But now, through the lens of the note, it looked like poison. He looked up, searching for Maya. She was at the far end of the room, pouring wine, but her eyes darted back to him, filled with a desperate terror. She had risked her job, perhaps her safety, to warn a homeless stranger. The coldness in Junho's chest expanded. This wasn't just poor service or snobbery anymore. This was assault. This was criminal. And Maya, the woman in the red vest, had just handed him the weapon he needed to execute the final judgment. He folded the note and slid it into his pocket, right next to the wad of cash. He picked up his knife, but he didn't cut the meat. He sat there, stone still, waiting for Preston to come over and ask how it tasted. And he would. The predator always returned to check on the kill. Junho's grip on the knife handle tightened until his knuckles matched the white of the tablecloth. The game had changed. It was no longer an inspection. It was a war. And the man in the dirty shirt was about to declare it. Junho sat motionless, the note burning a hole in his pocket against the rough fabric of his trousers. The tomahawk steak sat before him, a beautiful, glistening lie. The smell, which moments ago had been intoxicating, now carried a faint, acrid undertone that his survival instincts, honed in the brutal backstreets of so long before he ascended to the boardroom, recognized instantly. It was the scent of contamination. Whether it was floor cleaner, excessive salt to mask spoilage, or something more bodily and vile, he didn't need a lab test to know the meat had been weaponized. Preston wasn't just refusing service. He was actively assaulting a customer he deemed subhuman. Junho's eyes flicked to the reflection in the darkened window pane to his right. He could see Preston at the service station, his back turned to the dining floor, shoulders shaking slightly in what looked like suppressed laughter. The manager was sharing a joke with a busboy, pointing toward the corner table. They were waiting for the show. They wanted to see the homeless man choke, or vomit, or recoil in confusion, validating their belief that he was nothing more than an animal reacting to stimuli. The rage that uncoiled in Junho's chest was cold and sharp, distinct from the hot, messy anger of a common brawl. This was the icy calculation of a man who owned the building, the land, and the very debt that kept this restaurant's vendors from cutting off supply. But he couldn't strike yet. He had to secure the chain of evidence. If he stood up now, Preston would claim it was a misunderstanding, that the meat was fine, that the homeless man was crazy. Junho picked up his fork and knife, his movements deliberately clumsy. He saw Maya watching from the shadows of the kitchen doorway, her hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She thought he hadn't read the note. She thought he was about to eat the poison she had tried to save him from. He needed to signal her, but he couldn't break character. Not with the cameras recording and Preston's eyes now swinging back to check the progress of his prank. Junho sliced a piece of the meat. It was cooked perfectly medium rare, a tragic waste of premium beef. He brought the fork to his mouth, pausing just an inch from his lips. He saw Preston lean forward, the predator anticipating the snap of the trap. Instead of eating, Junho lowered the fork and let out a loud, hacking cough, a performance of sickness that fit his disguise perfectly. He grabbed the napkin, a pristine white cloth that felt like silk, and pretended to wipe his mouth, deftly sliding the cut piece of meat into the folds of the fabric. He crumpled the napkin in his hand, hiding the evidence. To the observer, it looked like a vagrant wiping his face. To Junho, it was the acquisition of Exhibit A. He repeated the process, cutting another piece, feigning a bite, and stashing it. He needed Preston to believe the transaction was complete. He needed the manager to believe the victim had been victimized. Only then would the arrogance be absolute. Only then would Preston's guard drop low enough for the final blow. The restaurant hummed around him, oblivious. A man at the next table laughed at a story about a yacht rental, clinking his wine glass. The disconnect between the surface luxury and the rotting moral core of the establishment was nauseating. Junho placed the fork down with a clatter. He sat back, letting his shoulders slump, projecting the image of a man satisfied, or perhaps sickeningly full. He waited. He knew the shark would come to inspect the water. Preston didn't disappoint. Within seconds of Junho putting the fork down, the manager smoothed his jacket, and began his approach. He didn't walk with the hurried pace of service. He sauntered, a smirk playing on his lips that he didn't bother to hide. He stopped at the edge of the table, looking down at the plate with the missing bites. "I see you've enjoyed the chef's special," Preston said, his voice dripping with faux politeness, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "It's a very rich cut. I hope it agrees with a delicate constitution like yours." There was a double meaning in his words, a cruelty that only the two of them and Maya understood. He was taunting a man he believed he had just poisoned. Preston reached for the plate, his fingers brushing the edge. "Shall I clear that for you? Or can you not afford to leave a single scrap behind?" "Leave it," Junho said, his voice raspy but firm. He placed a dirty hand over the edge of the plate. "I am not finished. And I have not paid." The mention of payment made Preston's eyes light up. This was the second part of the trap. Preston fully expected the card to decline, or for the cash to be short, giving him the legal right to call the police for theft of services. He wanted the arrest as much as he wanted the humiliation. "Of course," Preston said, pulling a leather billfold from his pocket and dropping the check onto the table. It landed with a soft thud. "The total is $162. Service is included, though I doubt you know what that word means." Preston stepped back, crossing his arms, turning his body slightly toward the dining room as if presenting the finale of a play. "Cash only, I assume. I don't think they issue Amex Black cards to residents of the underpass." Junho reached into his pocket. He bypassed the note from Maya, his fingers brushing against the paper that had saved him, and grabbed the wad of cash. He pulled it out, a messy, chaotic brick of bills. He began to count them out onto the white tablecloth, one by one. The bills were crinkled, some stained with coffee, others torn at the corners. He smoothed each one out with agonizing slowness. $1, $5,
10.
The process was excruciating. The diners nearby stopped eating to watch. It was a spectacle of poverty in a temple of wealth. Preston tapped his foot, checking his watch, rolling his eyes at a table of regulars who were snickering. But Junho wasn't just counting money, he was buying time. He was letting the tension build until it was a physical weight in the room. He needed every eye on him. He needed the audience to be fully engaged so that when the curtain fell, they would never forget what they saw. He placed the final bill on the stack. $170. "Keep the change," Junho said, looking up. For the first time, he dropped the vacancy from his eyes. He looked directly at Preston, and the intensity of his gaze made the manager blink. "For the staff. For the ones who actually work," Preston hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The homeless man wasn't cowering. He wasn't sick yet. And he had paid. The narrative Preston had constructed, of the thief, the nuisance, was crumbling. But greed won out. Preston reached out and snatched the money from the table, not bothering to count it. "Right," Preston said, turning away. "Now get out. You've eaten. You've paid. Your presence is no longer required." He made a shooing motion, like one would to a stray dog.
"Go.
"Before I have security drag you out the back." This was the moment, the fulcrum upon which the entire evening balanced. Preston had taken the money. The contract was sealed. The service, poisoned food, had been rendered and paid for. The crime was complete. Junho didn't move toward the door. Instead, he slowly pushed his chair back. The scrape of the wooden legs against the floor was loud, a harsh, grating sound that silenced the nearest conversations. He stood up. He didn't stand like a man with a broken spirit or a bad back. He uncurled his spine, rising to his full height, which was considerable. He rolled his shoulders back, shedding the hunch he had adopted for the last 2 hours. He reached for the napkin on the table, the one holding the tainted meat, and tucked it securely into his left pocket. Then, he reached into his right pocket and pulled out something that didn't belong to a homeless man. It was a sleek, matte black smartphone, the kind that cost more than the steak he had just purchased. He placed it on the table, the screen lighting up. "I don't think I will be leaving, Preston," Junho said. His voice had changed completely. The rasp was gone. The hesitation was gone. The voice that emerged was a deep, resonant baritone, clipped and precise, carrying the weight of boardrooms and backroom deals. It was the voice of a man who gave orders, not one who took them. In fact, Jun-ho continued, unbuttoning the dirty cuffs of his shirt to reveal a gold watch that gleamed under the chandelier light. I think everyone else is going to be leaving. Except you. The volume of the room dropped to 0. The jazz music seemed to fade into the background. Preston froze, the wad of cash still clutched in his hand. He turned back slowly, his face pale, his brain trying to reconcile the image of the dirty clothes with the voice of absolute authority. Excuse me? Preston stammered, his arrogance faltering. Who do you think you are? Jun-ho didn't answer immediately. He reached up and wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek with his thumb, his expression one of utter disdain. He looked at the smartphone on the table, tapped the screen once, and a chime echoed through the silent restaurant. It was the sound of the front door locking. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy clink that reverberated through the floor. The diners looked around in confusion. The host at the front podium tried the handle and found it immovable. Panic began to ripple through the room, but Jun-ho held the center. He was the gravity. My name, he said, stepping around the table and closing the distance between himself and the manager, is Jun-ho Park. I am the chairman of K Hospitality Group. I own this building. I own this brand. And as of 30 seconds ago, I own the evidence of your crime. The name hit Preston like a physical blow. He staggered back, his heel catching on the carpet. K Hospitality was the parent company, a massive conglomerate known for its ruthless efficiency and its elusive, ghost-like CEO who is rumored to have ties to organizations far darker than the Chamber of Commerce. Preston's mouth opened and closed, fish-like. Mr. Park, he squeaked. No, that's impossible. You look like... I look like the people you despise. Jun-ho finished for him, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. I look like the vulnerable.
The weak.
The ones you think you can abuse, because no one is watching. Jun-ho reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled note Maya had given him. He held it up for the room to see. But someone was watching. He turned his gaze toward the kitchen door, where Maya was standing, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Come here, Maya, Jun-ho said, his voice softening instantly. Step forward. You have nothing to fear. Maya hesitated, then walked slowly onto the floor. The other servers parted for her, looking at Jun-ho with a mixture of awe and terror. This woman, Jun-ho announced, addressing the stunned diners, is the only person in this establishment who possesses a shred of honor.
She warned me.
She risked her livelihood to stop a stranger from being poisoned. He turned back to Preston, whose face was now a mask of sweaty gray terror. You, on the other hand, ordered your kitchen to contaminate food. You took payment for it. You mocked the transaction. Jun-ho took a step closer, invading Preston's personal space, radiating a menacing energy that made the manager shrink. Do you know what we do with rot in my organization, Preston? We cut it out. It was a joke, Preston stammered, holding his hands up, the dirty money still clutched in his fist. Sir, please, it was just a joke for the boys in the back.
I didn't mean for you to actually.
I mean, we would never hurt anyone. Liar, Jun-ho said calmly. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the napkin containing the spit-out steak. He tossed it onto the table next to the phone. I'm going to have this analyzed. Whatever is in it, floor cleaner, saliva, raw waste, it will be found. And you will be charged with assault, reckless endangerment, and fraud. Jun-ho looked at the phone. My security team is 5 minutes out. The police are 10 minutes behind them. You have exactly that long to explain to these people. He gestured to the wealthy patrons watching in horrified fascination, why their dining experience has been subsidized by cruelty. The room was in chaos. A woman in the back screamed as she realized she had been eating in the same restaurant where the manager poisoned guests. People were standing up, throwing napkins down, demanding refunds. But Jun-ho ignored them. He kept his eyes locked on Preston. You judged me by my clothes, Jun-ho said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You thought poverty was a weakness. You forgot that hunger makes a man sharp. You forgot that when you have nothing to lose, you see everything. He plucked the cash from Preston's limp hand. You're fired, Preston. But that's the least of your problems. By tomorrow morning, your name will be blacklisted in every hospitality database in the hemisphere. You won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a prison cafeteria. Preston collapsed into a chair, his legs giving out. He looked at the kitchen staff, pleading for support, but they turned their backs on him. The chef, a large man who had been laughing earlier, was now furiously scrubbing a pan, trying to look invisible. The power dynamic had flipped so violently that the air in the room felt electric. Junho turned to Maya. She was still shaking. He walked over to her, ignoring the murmuring crowd. He took her hands in his hands, still dirty from the disguise, holding hers with a reverence he hadn't shown anyone else all night. I am sorry you had to work in fear, Junho said to her. That ends tonight. He looked around the room, raising his voice one last time. This restaurant is closed effective immediately for a complete restructuring. Everyone here will be refunded. Please leave. He gestured to the door, and the magnetic locks clicked open with a decisive snap. The diners didn't argue. They fled, eager to escape the intensity of the judgment they had just witnessed. They filed out past the man in the dirty shirt, no longer looking at him with disgust, but with fear and respect. When the room was finally empty of guests, silence reclaimed the space. Only the staff remained, lined up against the back wall like soldiers awaiting a court-martial. Preston was sobbing quietly at table 4. Junho looked at Maya. You have a choice, he told her. You can leave with them, and I will write you a check for 5 years of salary to start your life over. Or you can stay. I need a manager who understands that dignity is the most expensive item on the menu. I need someone who sees the human being, not the suit. Maya looked at Preston, broken and small in the chair. Then she looked at the restaurant, the place that had been her prison for years. She looked at Junho, seeing past the dirt to the man underneath. She straightened her posture, wiping the tears from her cheeks. She took a deep breath, the fear evaporating, replaced by the steel that had made her slip the note in the first place. I'll stay, she said, her voice clear. But we're changing the menu. And the rules. Junho smiled, a genuine expression that cracked the mask he had worn all night. Good, he said. Start by throwing that steak in the trash. And then get yourself a table. Tonight, I'm serving you. He turned and walked toward the kitchen, rolling up his dirty sleeves, ready to scrub the rot away and build something clean from the ashes.